Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you back to the Dynamic Decisions podcast, where we explore the strategies that drive successful decision-making in the world of business. Why? Because the best decisions come from great conversations. I'm your host, Tisha Cable, CEO of C Model Data, and today we have a passionate leader dedicated to educational equity and empowerment. His name is William. He's the founder of Village of Wisdom. And guess what? Since 2014, he has been empowering Black parents to influence decisions, shaping educational environments for Black youth, helping families to really prepare their children for all of the unique challenges that they face in America. So thank you so much, William, for being here with us. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'd love to learn more about you, more about Village of Wisdom.
Yeah. So thanks for the welcome, Tisha. So Village of Wisdom and Village of Wisdom, what we do is we like to say we're working with the Black child's first teacher, AKA their parents. And when we think about working with Black parents, we know that they're really tasked with this unfathomable task, which is ushering the soul of a Black child into this world, a world where that soul is oftentimes threatened emotionally, physically. And so what does it mean to walk beside and walk along Black parents who are really trying to find a way to cultivate and bring forward and that child's Black genius, its greatest opportunity? And so when we think about that and we think about what Black parents bring to the table, we know that they bring kind of generations of history and traditions. And that's why we talk about our work as wisdom, right? Like Village of Wisdom. Right. And so what does it mean to bring that work to bear in the soul of that kind of knowing that we have that's been passed down from generation in our DNA? And then what does it look like to blend that with learning science? So we know a lot of things about how do we actually facilitate learning? How does the brain work? How do we match what we know about what the brain works and the wisdom that Black parents bring to bear? And what we call that is the blending of soul and science. As a scientist, as somebody who has a chemistry background, but also a PhD in learning science, I think a lot about what are the limitations of science in this Western world. In a Western dominated society. And I think one of the things that we know about the history of science is that as we pulled into this objective era where everything is like pure and there is no impact from humans, like you're trying to make something really highly experimental. And the reality is that if humans are involved, even in measurement, it's really difficult to remove that, and especially in social sciences. And so I think we've made this artificial thing of, well, science doesn't include soul. It doesn't include wisdom. It's just like objective facts. And I think we lost something. And so really at Village of Wisdom, we talk a lot about, okay, how do we bring the soul and science together to give a more complete answer that recognizes the humanity of Black people and Black children in particular. And if we can use and codify the insights that Black parents have as tools, resources, measures, then we can hold a standard for the rest of society of how to treat our children and how to pursue their learning. And if folks have standards, then they can make better decisions about how to educate Black children, leading to our whole ethos of protecting Black genius.
Wow. Okay. So I'm fascinated just based on that. And I know growing up, I don't remember any such institutions really existing. I feel in my family's generation, they just felt their way through. So it's really kind of awesome that someone with your experience and expertise is willing to turn around and lend that back to ensuring that the next generation actually has a set of parents who are equipped to handle in a much more proactive way the journey that they're about to approach. I kind of think about my work experience in some ways and think about what would that have looked like had I been guided a certain way. Mm-hmm. So, good thing is it all worked out, but it's a fascinating journey to have gone through. Okay, listen, so keeping all of this in mind, what do you actually believe is the most critical element for organizations and communities to really succeed in trying to create equitable educational environments for Black youth in what is really a complex social landscape today?
Yeah, what do I think is most important for organizations that are trying to create these environments? I mean, I think, one of the things that we frequently do is we undervalue the wisdom of Black parents. And then I think on top of that undervaluing, we tend to do this thing where we paint everybody the same. And so, oh, you're a Black parent, so you're going to act this particular way, or, oh, you're a Black parent, you're going to have this particular insight. You're a Black child in the South, and so you're going to show up in this particular way, or you're a Black child in the Northeast. And so while obviously Black people have commonalities across regions and even across countries. There is a individualism that comes up that is important when it comes to shaping the identity of a unique Black child. And so I think when we talk about the Black parent being the child's first teacher, most times, especially if we're talking about a K-12 environment, that parent has known that child at least 5 more years than you have. If just like kids start kindergarten at 5, they've known this child for at least 5 years. And so if you can't find a way to leverage the wisdom that parent is bringing to you about what they've observed by that child, then that child loses, the parent loses, and then you lose as an educator, right? Because you're just not as effective. But what I will say, even before we've gotten to the most recent wild iteration of what's happening to our society, educators have not necessarily had the tools and resources to have that conversation well. What does it mean to put in the hands of an educator a tool that supports them in having conversations with parents about what they know about their child? And then how do we help them integrate that information into a learning environment that makes that child feel seen? Right? Because I think, what people tend to miss, right, is the fundamentals of learning. And that is, learning is about connecting prior knowledge to new information. So this is also why parents are so important, because parents have a good sense of the prior knowledge that child is bringing to the classroom and what that prior knowledge might be steeped in. So I grew up in the South, in Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. And so there's certain prior knowledge as a child that I brought to the classroom. My dad was also an aircraft mechanic. And so there was a lot of engineering and tinkering stuff that I brought to the classroom. How might you leverage that? Because that's something that rubbed off on me. My mom was an educator, so I spent a lot of times in schools, right? So I knew different things about how that stuff was going to look like before I even got there. How would you leverage their wisdom, right, to really create an environment that would be best for a young William? I don't really know. I know a lot of the things that my mom did to put me in a good situation. And I think my dad did the dad thing around grit and determination. But again, I guess my point here is that if you're trying to help a child make connections to their prior knowledge, it's important for you to know who they are and where their prior knowledge comes from. Because when you know that, then you're going to help facilitate them being able to make that connection. And so often what happens is we see Black children in classrooms, and because we like to vilify Black culture, but then we like to repeat it in other ways. But when it comes to Black people acting Black, I think even me saying it like that, probably people is starting to cringe, acting Black, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's but no, but that's how we show up in the world. And in that showing up is who we bring. And when you tell a child that they can't bring that person, they can't bring that hair, they can't bring that speech, they can't bring that clothes because you're suspending them because they got locks. You're telling them they can't talk like that because it's ebonics or whatever you want to call it. You're telling them they can't wear those clothes because it's intimidating because they got a hoodie on. You're telling them they can't bring themselves. And if they can't bring themselves, then they can't bring that prior knowledge. And if they can't bring the prior knowledge, then they can't learn. And so I think a lot of people, they make it about a whole bunch of other stuff. But that's what I'm talking about in terms of blending the soul with the science. It's do you understand the fundamentals of learning? And then are you applying what you know about that child to facilitate that child's learning?
Okay. So on that note, just to dig a little deeper. So you've got this background as a research assistant, PhD student, UNC Chapel Hill. I don't know if you have, some people have, my school. So you studied self-regulated learning and cultural mismatch, cognitive burden. How do you actually use these research insights to really inform your current approach to designing programs and resources for the families that you serve?
Yep. So obviously you've done your homework here. My alma mater pride, although I love what UNC Chapel Hill did for me, is definitely with Norfolk State. Shout out to my HBCUs.
All right. But shout out to HBCUs. Yeah.
But I think a lot of what you just said, right, self-regulated learning, cognitive mismatch, all of that stuff is basically kind of what I was just speaking to. What ends up happening, a cognitive mismatch is something I remember, when I was at Chapel Hill, I was taking an advanced statistics course. And a good example of this is that, loved the teacher. He was a great guy, but he was using a lot of North Carolina geography to try to make connections to these somewhat abstract math, statistical concepts. I'm not from North Carolina, And so now the thing that you're trying to connect with me on I don't have access to. And so you're using an analogy or an example that is difficult for me to connect to. I don't have the prior knowledge to connect to that. And so now you're not helping me acquire this new information. And so often Black children are looking for somebody to activate their prior knowledge. But because of cultural mismatches, they can't find that activation. Right? And actually, the best way to activate somebody's prior knowledge is to ask them a question, right? So like, Tisha, where are you from? How did you grow up? What schools did you go to? And now I know a little bit about you. And so now I can make a connection that is culturally relevant. And so I think a lot of times people hear that and they feel like, oh, this is an exclusion thing or something like whatever. No, literally, this is how we work. Like, this is how our minds work. And so oftentimes what I talked about and what I was kind of really interested in when I was getting my PhD is not only that cultural mismatch, right? Because that's one cognitive kind of disadvantage we put Black kids in. It's like we're given these analogies and they can't connect to it. You know, it's like all the books.
Like on the SAT, tests. They ask about the boats or the yachts. And we're like, what? I ain't never had no yacht. No, right? I ain't never been on a yacht. I'm sorry. Like, you know, I don't know. Right. Ask me about the corner store. Like I might know. Or, you know what I mean? Whatever it is, right? Like I think that those are all things. Yeah.
But the other side of it, though, is then the distance that we ask kids to cover. So this is where I think, you know, you briefly mentioned like your own work history, right? A lot of us spend cognitive energy trying to code switch to, and it's two ways, right? Like there's a code switching of how do I help you understand me, right? And that's, I think, the one that we think about the most. But the part that hurts the learning process or impacts the learning process is actually the other one, which is I'm trying to understand you, right? Like, so now I got to figure out how I'm going to take this North Carolina topography example and put it into a context about Georgia, or maybe it's a basketball thing for me, or maybe it's like, because I was really into chemistry, I'm making a connection, but I'm doing all of this energy while somebody who's from North Carolina doesn't have to cover that same distance, doesn't have to make that stuff up. And so then we see the changes in that and we're like, oh, well, there's an achievement gap. And it's like, yeah, but whose fault? Who's the source of that achievement gap? Is it the child who is doing the best of what they have with their cultural knowledge that you've been devaluing? Or is it you as an adult who has not spent the time to understand the children inside of the classroom to help them cover that ground? And so that's kind of like what we mean about cultural mismatch. And so then what Village of Wisdom did is we talked with Black parents and asked them questions about like, what would you like to see inside of your classrooms? Right, or inside of your child's classroom, and what are the issues? And so they would say some of the same things, like, you know, my child don't trust these teachers, ain't no Black history up in here. You know, I really wish that they would talk about things that my child was interested in. And you might hear that and be like, okay, like I hear that. But this is the place where we're blending soul and science, because talking about a child's interest is related to self-determination theory, which is a theory that's kind of forwarded by this group called DC and Ryan, right? So there's these authors who talked about intrinsic motivation. The desire to learn comes from a place inside of you, right? And if you want to do a high order task or a difficult task, you need to have that intrinsic motivation to move through it. So it's one thing for a parent to say, like, my child ain't interested, but it's another thing for that parent to then cite DC and Ryan and say, like, no, but this is why these interests are very important, right? It's one thing to say Black history is important. It's another thing to say, like, hey, racial socialization and racial identity development literature by Sellers and Neblett and Cord and all these other people have shown that healthy outcomes for Black children, especially in mental health, is important to that, right? And so it's just interesting how you might see a teacher or an educator's face change or mind change when you put that research, that learning science behind that wisdom that the parent is bringing. And then what we did was like, okay, well, we're going to take this a step further. A lot of people are talking about culturally responsive practices or culturally affirming practices, but how do you assess that, right?
Yeah.
And then how do we put a student in the position to assess it? And so one of the things we did was create a survey that students could say, like, yeah, this classroom is actually speaking to my interests. It is helping me feel good about my Blackness and showing me the intellectual contributions of people that look like me, is allowing me to develop trusting relationships with my peers and my teacher, right? Because all of those things are predictors, are the things that you would look to that would actually allow for education or learning to happen well. And so like we validate it. And then so you give that data back to teachers, you give it to parents, you give it to whoever to kind of help the teacher make an adjustment around like, yeah, I appreciate you making this adjustment. And when we look at this data, it looks like you could do a little bit better here or a little bit better there. And a lot of times folks, they don't have that level of data to be able to make those types of changes.
So this is perfect because you actually just answered my next question, which was all about when you're kind of measuring the success of educational equity initiatives, like what are those KPIs that you find the most telling about whether or not you're actually making a difference for the students and the families, right? Because we could just be doing any old thing. So you kind of answered that question, maybe diving into one specific thing and some insights that you've seen on how this moves the needle in a practical, tangible way.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that we've seen kind of move the needle is, so there's 6 different elements in our Black Genius framework, right? Which we also call the culturally affirming learning framework. And in particular, all 6 of those have been kind of tied to better attendance and better suspensions, which attendance is a big thing right now. Like, kids aren't going to school as much as we would like them to because of the pandemic and all this other stuff. But then a couple of them in particular were actually correlated also to academic performance, right? And so what we saw is that when we think about social justice and multicultural navigation, like, so how we ask kids to move across different cultural environments, and then also like the causes that they find interesting, like those things are actually tied to better academic performance. And so those are, key things that we're trying to look into and investigate more. And then what we're actually doing now is that, we are running a study, right, to basically investigate to see if that correlation that I just talked about, because that's just to say like one thing rises with the other, not that one thing causes the other, right? And so what we're trying to see is that, like, in these schools where we're doing this work with, if we ask the teachers to do these specific things, do we notice that those students actually do better, right? So like we could, a year from now, I could come on this podcast and say, like, yeah, when teachers really focus on the interest of Black boys, what we notice is that their performance in math goes up, right? Or when teachers really, focus in on how we ask kids to move across different cultural environments, for whatever reason, that's having an outsized impact on Black girls in science classes, right? So that's the type of data that we're looking for, but we haven't necessarily had access to. And I think last thing I'll just say about this is, like, I think it's important, especially for folks who are leaders and people who are thinking about culturally affirming practices and other equitable practices, is that the history of this country has made it difficult for us to have this level of assessment in place. Right? So when we think about who came up with the idea of culturally affirming practices or intersectional theories or whatever, like, when did that stuff happen? Like, Gloria Lansing Billings is living. She's the one who came up with this idea, and it happened in 1996. I know how old I was in 1996, but I'm also older than that, and I'm not that old. So what we're talking about is that, like, we also have to be somewhat patient with ourselves as the science kind of catches up to where we would like it to be. And sometimes that's a whole nother thing, but I just think sometimes I think we're like, oh, well, why aren't we so much further along? And it feels to me like a little bit like too harsh on ourselves.
Yeah.
Because we just haven't been there.
Yeah, let me ask you this. And so, because there are a bunch of places that we haven't been yet, right? And right now, the landscape in general is shifting, right? So as we think of, over time, a lot of things change, right? Especially culturally, we start to blend more, right? There's so many things that start to find adjustment. I'm wondering, how do you make sure that you're not working in the past all the time, but that you're actually thinking about what this looks like in the future lens? Because the dynamics that exist today are different, and the dynamics that will exist tomorrow will be different than the dynamics that may have existed in the 70s, 80s, not even, right? So tell me a little bit about how you think about the evolving needs of families and educational systems. Because I'm going to tell you, with technology, to AI in particular, and some other forms of technology, you're going to see the educational system make an adjustment. So I'm just wondering where you see yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think even before the AI push, like, I was kind of telling people, like, I wouldn't bet on schools, right? Like, if it was stock, I wouldn't buy stock on public schools and education in America. Not because I don't believe in them. I think we need them, but just like the outlook of the country, like, that's not something I would say is like a smart investment. I think I agree with you, right? Like, we're in a different place than we have been in the past, but I also think, a lot of people talk about this concept of Sankofa, and it's like one of those wisdom pieces that I think has been passed down to us over and over again. And when we look at it, where we are now, 60 years from Brown versus Board of Education, we're actually in a really similar spot as we were at that time, where it was difficult to, in public, talk about being Black and comfortable with that, right? Without repercussions, without somebody trying to take your resources or tell you that you're doing the wrong thing. And so during that time, we don't probably do enough to look at what has happened to inform what we are doing right now. And so in particular, Carter G. Woodson, I don't think gets enough credit. This is the guy who came up with Black History Week that ends up being Black History Month. And if you go look at what Black History Week was when he started it, the level of intensity, the clarity, the teamwork around the educators that were happening, how they were convening to talk about how they were going to do this secondary curriculum that they knew that the schools could not hold. We have a lot to learn about that. So to your point around, you have, a presidential kind of group who is pushing AI into classrooms. Like there's been multiple orders around, okay, AI needs to be a part of education. And then there's been orders on anti-woke AI. And so if you blend those two things together, now you're talking about potentially state-funded or federally funded AI tools that are trying to whitewash or smooth over some of the atrocities and injustices that have been put against Black people and all other people. And what that does is it makes Black children, if you don't see the injustices, if you don't see how Durham was recreated because they built a highway through the strongest Black community that we had here, or how they did that in Tulsa, or how they did it basically across the country, then it makes you as a Black person think, oh, there must be something wrong with us because why don't we have what everybody else has? And that's kind of the chief thing about that history. And so I think the thing that we do need to learn, and there's actually a book about this, I'm going to forget the name of it, but essentially they talk about Carter G. Woodson's life and like how they built this momentum. Because one thing to think about is like all of that stuff for Black History Week and Black History Month came before Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. So ask yourself the question, what was it like? Yeah, what was it like to have Black History Month and week before them? And the guy who wrote the book about this really kind of lays it out in his it's called Fugitive Pedagogy. And just even in the name of that, like think about how we will probably have to be more fugitive in our instructional capacity as we move forward, and how will we take advantage of some of the things that are coming down the pipe. For example, what's happening in a lot of the southern states where 50% of Black people live is in 12 southeastern states. Those southeastern states are also the states that are starting to put voucher programs out. What's that going to mean? That means that they're going to be putting money directly in the hands of people inside of those states to pursue the education of their kids.
Yeah.
Now, I don't love this idea because like you're not going to be able to get the bang for your buck at $7,000 per person that you get when you pool all of that money together. But as parents have that control, as Black parents have that control, do we have the resources and materials ready for the Black parents who are taking on that? And how are organizations like ours building the types of tools and creating the type of revenue models that are low enough and access enough for parents to be able to access that, but then also really pushing those children to think about how they are going to imagine what Black genius looks like in 2045 or 2065, and how are we embedding ideas and concepts that allow them to think about like, well, what is going to be the highest value for my community and myself when I become an adult. If this AI can write an email instantly, if it can do this analysis instantly, maybe it is about my creativity. Maybe it is about me being able to do a trade. Maybe it is about like what I'm building, right? And so like, are we asking kids those questions, and are we building tools that help them not only think about, and I think this is really important because isolation, I think, is really kicking our ass right now. Not only about how do I build individual wealth, but how do I build community wealth and community connections? Because if we don't do that, then they will isolate us to death, right? Our riches will not save us. And at a certain point, you just won't have
part of the
money.
problem now is that most people live inside out and not outside in. And the challenge is, then we end up with one who made it. But unfortunately, that leaves a whole lot of us not just not having made it, but without the information and the tools around how to actually move to that next place. I think what's interesting about this conversation for me is because one might look in general and be like, well, Tisha, you got a show about business decision making. How does this fit? Well, how it fits is this. There's a series of decisions that parents have to make about the educational experience of their students. I'm talking to you about that of a Black parent, about a Black student. The same concept, though, is true for any individual. It's a special, unique scenario here that we're talking about that deserves the spotlight that it's getting. But decision-making in itself is just incredibly important. And the more informed people are in general about how to think about these things from an outside-in lens, the better it will be. So essentially, that's how I see your organization. You just thought about a problem and have thought about it from an outside-in lens. Because you could have taken your PhD and said, you know what? I'm going out here and I'm going to do me. But instead, you said, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to use my time, energy, mind to support my people. And I think that that's absolutely wonderful. I think that it's okay. And I think it's great. So I say that to say that these are all the kinds of there's decision layers across so many things that we do in life. And these decisions end up impacting the world that we live in. So if we're not having this conversation out loud about the decisions that get made in this unique situation, then what happens is no one else knows. So there are people who listen to this podcast who absolutely need to understand where their future workforce is going to come from and the things that they might need to get involved in today to ensure that that future workforce is not just prepared, but comfortable when they get there. So I'm wholly appreciative for that reason that this is the work that you and your organization are doing. And then I also appreciate the fact that you've put the soul on the inside of the process. So this is great. So with that said, thank you for letting me do that. I have my favorite part of my podcast is a decision-making persona assessment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 4 questions. And for each one of them, I'm going to ask 4 questions in a certain way. And each one of them is going to represent a different decision-making approach. And after each one, I'd like you to tell me how much the way that I'm asking the question resonates with how you would approach decision-making. And you're going to do this on a scale from 0 to 100%, okay? But you only get 100% across all 4. Make sense? Kind of?
0 to 100%. I only get, so if it's 25, 25, 25.
No bueno, no fun, no bueno, no good. We don't want none of that. It could be, but I don't want that. You're going to actually like listen and then you'll give it a real balance.
Okay, I got it. All right.
You got it? Okay, cool. And I only give you 1 at a time and then you answer. All right?
Well, then how am I supposed
I know.
Don't I need all of them? Okay, go ahead. It's your podcast.
It's my, thank you. I appreciate it. And most people want them all. And I'm like, no, that just takes away the fun for me. So here's the first one. The first one is called the feeler. It's a values-driven leader. This persona prioritizes alignment with core values and mission, often weighing the human impact and cultural fit of decisions alongside business metrics. So when considering new initiatives or partnerships for a Village of Wisdom, I ask myself, does this align with our commitment to empowering Black families and creating equitable educational environments? Even if a more expedient solution might generate short-term results, I need to feel confident that we're building lasting relationships and positive impact that extends beyond just immediate outcomes. How much does approaching decisions by asking yourself that kind of values-based question resonate with you?
And if I say 100%, then I don't have any to give to the rest of them.
That's correct.
I mean, that's pretty high.
Okay. What you got?
Is this like spades? I can go back and kind of up my thing, or like?
Yeah, you can go back after. You can.
Yeah, that's like at least 70, I think.
Okay. Could be true. Let's see what happens on the next one. Okay. Yeah. That's okay. You might have overbid, but probably not. I think from what I've heard, you might be okay. Here's the next one. The planner. This one is called the strategic visionary. So the persona focuses on the long-term implications and future-proofing your decisions, always thinking several moves ahead and considering multiple scenarios. So when making strategic decisions about program development or community engagement, I ask myself, what are the long-term implications of this choice for how families and schools will collaborate over the next 5 to 10 years? I need to map out how social, cultural, and educational trends will evolve, which ensures that our programs position families for multiple possible futures while maintaining adaptability and potentially sustainability. So, William, how much does that forward-thinking scenario planning approach resonate with how you make decisions?
I would say 30, but you have 2 more things left. So I'm going to go 20.
Okay. All right. So you only have 10% left for 2 more. Okay.
I mean, yeah, it's your podcast. So, we just going to do this how you want to do it.
Yes, that's exactly what we're going to do. Thank you very much. Okay. Here we go. The next one is called the counter. It's a challenger of assumptions. So this persona naturally questions conventional wisdom and looks for contrarian opportunities, often finding success by zigging when others zag. So when evaluating educational strategies or partnerships, I ask myself, what assumptions are we making about how families engage with schools that might be fundamentally wrong? What is everyone else in the education and social change space doing that we should question? I tend to dig into why certain approaches work and whether there's a more innovative method that's leveraging our unique position to solve problems differently. How much does the assumption challenging contrarian style resonate with you?
I mean, it resonates a lot, but I don't think it's not necessarily how I do it, because a lot of this stuff just wasn't there, at least in our current conception. And so I guess I can be okay with putting that at 5% to leave some for this last one. But I think a lot of our stuff is ain't nobody seen it, nothing like it before. But we'll cook with 5.
Okay, we're cooking with 5, cooking with grease. Here we go. Here's the next one. This one is called the data driver. It's an evidence-based decision maker. So this persona relies heavily on metrics, analytics, and concrete evidence to validate decisions, preferring proof over intuition. So before making important decisions about our programs or resource allocation, I ask myself, what does our performance data actually tell us about program effectiveness, family engagement, and student outcomes? I want to see concrete analytics on everything from participation rates to long-term educational impact that can validate our strategic instincts about where to focus our efforts for maximum community value.
I mean, I guess I only got 5% left, so that's what I was going to have to say. But, I think there's definitely, we talk about ourselves as a research organization right now. Part of getting good research is actually having good quality tools. And so we've had to do a lot of work to get to that point of even measuring. But I get the value of that. I do think if I was going to do data versus contrary versus what was the second one?
That was your planner. So right now you're at 70% feeler, 20% planner, 5% counter, and then 5% data driver.
I probably would push up counter to 10. Take away 5 from
planner.
The planner, yeah. Give that 5 to the last one, the data, and
to
making
make that
it
10.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you would be 70, 10, 10, 10.
Yeah, good enough.
Good enough,
we quibble
right?
Around
We're just having a good time.
Uh-huh.
But it's a cool set, right? I think, the concept is balance in how we approach these things. It could also be you've got the organization level view of this, and then you also have to think about your team dynamics, right? Sometimes you might be 100% feeler and someone on your team is 100% counter. That works too. But the thing we want to understand is just that we're balancing out this concept within decision making. We need all 4 pieces. So it's kind of like a trick question in some ways. Don't tell any of my next guests because, I like everybody to have a little thing. But yeah, that's really it. Thank you.
25,
yeah, don't do that. No, thank you. No, appreciate it. Listen, thank you so much. That was fun. I enjoyed it. As we kind of wrap up our conversation here, I got one final question for you. If you could give one piece of advice to leaders who are looking to create meaningful social change through education, what would it be?
I'm trying to think about the advice to myself that I would give myself. And I think one of the things that's been difficult about my work is I've had really great teams and people who've been instrumental in pulling this work along. And I think one of the things that every leader should be thinking about is, what does your team look like? How do those folks complement your skill set? And who are kind of really running partners or road dogs to do this work, because it can feel very isolating and very lonely. And you are most likely, especially for the next 60 years or so, going to be working in pretty tense and adversarial environments. And so you want to make sure that you are able to have those connections. And I think one additional piece to that is just, what does it look like for you to create the foundation of that relationship in the mission and not your friendship? And not to say that friendship is not important to the work that we are doing, but to recognize that most likely if you do this work at a high level, there will be really unreasonable moments that you will have to meet. And that will require something out of you that a friendship bounds would not tolerate. because under the guise of friendship, this should be whatever. But under the guise of we're trying to get this mission, you know what I mean? Then that's it's a different conversation. And that means, and I don't mean that to say that like people should treat people poorly. This is not an excuse to treat people poorly. It is just to say, what does it mean to establish your relationships in a mission and vision first place and allow that work to guide that relationship? And so then I think it also might help folks separate it. So if the friendship is to survive that relationship, it's like, yeah, we've gotten to a point to where we actually can't hold this in this container. And so this was a good run, right? It's a good sprint. And I will continue to be your friend outside of this. And as we move forward, it's my time to tap out. I can't actually do this like I want to. That's a sensitive thing, probably not the thing I should try to do in my last statements, but I think it's okay. Something for folks to think about.
Yeah, do you. No, this is great. All right. Listen, thank you so much. I thank you for being here. I thank you for sharing all of your expertise. Thank you for sharing your insights. I do think it's important work. So thank you for doing it and being brave enough to do it and talk about it, especially as the world is changing as it is today. I think that there are certain things we have to continually bring light to. There's certain work that just remains important. So thank you for doing it. So for our listeners, would you share with them where they can learn more about you and more about Village of Wisdom?
Yeah, of course. So you can follow us on Instagram at Village of Wisdom. That's pretty simple. And then if you want to try to keep up with me, I think my most active posting is on LinkedIn. So William P. Jackson on LinkedIn, you should be able to find me. Those would be my main things. And then obviously, if you want to find out more about the organization, you can go to villageofwisdom.org, hit our follow and receive our updates, and you'll be able to stay in contact.
Fantastic. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, the best decisions come from great conversations. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe it, rate it, share it with your network. Let's keep the conversation going on social media using Dynamic Decisions Podcast. And until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and keep leading with purpose.